So the main purpose of this is just to do a bit of an intro about what we mean by net zero, just sort of linking this into the wider sustainability topics and our behaviours. This very much sits around those top 5 behaviours that we're looking to push. All of these will help us to get to net zero quicker and reduce our carbon footprint. And obviously this is aligned to our strategic pillars, our carbon net zero strategic pillar, but also our responsible materials, because a lot of reducing our carbon emissions is based around how we use materials and the types of materials that we use. That's what sits within the wider topic. So first off, I am going to ask you a question, see how much you've been paying attention to the news articles that have been coming out. When have we, Ground Control, committed to be net zero by? I'll give you a bit of a starter for 10. So if you just pop in the chat whether you think it's A, B, C, D or E or F. Mark, if you're able to kind of give me a bit of a
I think a lot of people have been paying attention to the news posts, so a very similar answer. Everyone's going to see, it looks like.
There's very...
Sophie did say before the start of the session that she had trouble with her internet, so it might be...
emissions in line with the Science Based Target Initiative requirements. So that's really good. I'm sure Chloe and Sam will be really pleased that you've all picked up on that. So I'm going to ask another question. I've not tried this before, and it says it's going to be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to have to just lean on you a bit, Mark, with this. Can I ask everyone just to hit the hands raised button? So if I was doing this in the room, I'd get you all to stand up. I can't. I won't get you to stand up on the call. But if you just put your hands up, and then I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and then for you to then put your hands down, I'm going to see how many people have their hands up at the end. Has everyone got their hands up?
Yes, I think we're...
Yeah, they do. Okay, brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
More or less. Excellent. Good. Okay, well, keep your hand up if you are reasonably comfortable with what we mean by net zero. So if you're like, oh, don't know what net zero is, put your hand down. But if you think, yeah, we've got a reasonable idea, I'm not expecting you to be an expert. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask any questions or pick on anyone at the end of this. It's just about sort of gauging people's understanding. So are there still hands up?
Yep, we've still got some hands up.
Mark, is anyone's hand still up?
Yes, we've still got some. Nope. No, Sophie, can you hear me?
Me?
Yeah, you're kind of cutting in there a little bit.
I can hear you now. Yes.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right. Okay. Apologies. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, can hear you now. Yep. It's just kind of cutting in there a little bit. Just.
Okay. So apologies for that. So Mark, are there any hands still up? People.
There are, a lot of hands still up. Yep.
Good. Excellent. Okay. So the next question is, keep your hands raised if you think you have a reasonable idea about what we mean by scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Okay, I'm gonna
hands going down. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's fine. Keep your hands up if you're comfortable with what we mean by greenhouse gases. And then finally, keep your hands up if you know what we mean by SBTI. And I'll tell you what SBTI is as a bit of a hand, which is Science Based Target Initiative, if you've got a good idea of what science-based targets are.
Okay, we've got about 10 hands left of our
10 hands. That's
yeah.
Okay. That's good. So at about 45, so that's what that's it. 20%. 20%. Yes, that's right, isn't it? 35% of you know what this. But it means about 75% don't, and we put this statement out there, and it's 75% of you probably aren't fully conversant with all of that stuff and that jargon. There's a lot of jargon in there. So one of the things I want to do is just kind of go through, actually break down what all these things are, so you can be really confident in what we're talking about here. So I'm going to talk about greenhouse gases first, very quickly. The greenhouse gases are essentially they are required to keep us nice and warm as a planet, and they are like a nice warm blanket around the Earth, keeping the temperature in. However, the more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere there are, the hotter we get, and there's too many blankets. So we often talk about talk in terms of carbon dioxide within the atmosphere, but actually there's a lot more gases out there which have a much bigger impact on what we call the global warming potential. So I'm trying not to get too techie with you here, but if we look at a ton of carbon dioxide, if you took a ton of methane, that would warm the Earth 25 times more than a ton of carbon dioxide. And you can see from the figures there, nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas, or you often seen it in canisters, is used as a recreational drug, is again 295 to 98 times more global warming potential. And then finally, that HCFCs, refrigerants that we have in air conditioning units, has an even greater impact on global warming potential. So when we're not just looking at carbon, when we're talking about greenhouse gases and emissions, we're looking at all of those emissions within our supply chain. So that's what we mean by greenhouse gases. So we want to limit all of them, not just carbon, but we move everything into units of carbon to make it easier to talk about. The scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, we refer to these a lot. So scope 1 emissions is anything that we have direct control over and burn directly. So for us, that's the fuel within our vehicles, the petrol or diesel within our vehicles, the gas within our offices, and those air conditioning units. So if they ever leak any of those greenhouse, the CFCs into HCFCs into the atmosphere, then that class as a scope 1. So direct things that we release directly into the atmosphere, things we have direct control of that we release direct into the atmosphere. Scope 2 is electricity and all the emissions that create that electricity. So if they're burning coal or oil or gas that's then making the electricity, it's the emissions associated with that, but it's what we have direct control over. So the electricity we have direct control over. Scope 1 and 2 are essentially ours, and then scope 3 is everything that feeds into our operations and us being able to deliver what we deliver. Key things around there are the materials that we use and the services that we use. It's around how things are transported to and from our sites. It's travelling for business. It's the waste we generate, and then sort of on the sort of downstream activities, which is fewer for us because we're not a manufacturing business, but relates to anything around any products that might be sold or anything what happens to products at the end of the life. So it's everything within the supply chain which goes around delivering what we have to deliver as a business. Scope 1 and 2 are ours, scope 3 are within the supply chain. It's the easiest way to remember it. So we talked about what net zero, we've talked about what greenhouse gases are and what scope 1, 2 and 3 is, but what actually do we mean by net zero? I think it's good here to differentiate between carbon neutral and net zero. So we are a carbon neutral business, and we have been for a number of years now. Since 2001 was when we first got certified as carbon neutral, and something that we should be very proud of. Now, what this does is focus on our scope 1 and 2 emissions, so the things that we've got direct control over and can influence the most. And what we've also added in there is a little bit of scope 3, and we also include our business travel, because although it's kind of in our scope 3, it is something that we can control relatively simply with the way we ask our people to move around the business. So our carbon neutral is about measuring those, reducing them, And then every year we'll then offset the remaining emissions. So so if we produce 2,000 tonnes, for example, of carbon emissions, then we will then pay for 2,000 tonnes to be offset through a number of different initiatives. That might be through reforestation initiatives or helping to reduce carbon being released into the atmosphere by funding wind farms and such like. So that's carbon neutral. We continue to be a carbon neutral business and something that we're proud of and shout about. Net zero is taking it to the next stage, and it's about looking at your full carbon footprint. So Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, and then it's looking under the Science Based Target Initiative, which is the gold standard globally when it comes to setting targets, is around reducing those by 90%. So saying, well, we're here and we need to reduce our emissions by at least 90% across all of those. So that's a significant gauge of dial that we need to turn. And then anything that you can't reduce, because there's always going to be a few residual emissions. So it's just going to be impossible, certainly within recent years, by 2038, that we won't be able to reduce or eliminate completely, is then about investing in some offsets to remove the remaining emissions, but that can only be up to 10%. So it's a lot tougher, much more encompassing being net zero. So we talked there about science-based targets. So Science-Based Target Initiative, as I say, is a globally recognised method and standard, which is, as I say, is very much seen as the gold standard, and a lot of other organisations are moving towards Science-Based Targets Initiative in order to ensure that they have the best available target set. But essentially what we mean by science-based, because it is ones that are linked to the best science available. So as that statement says, their science-based targets show companies how much and how quickly they need to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to prevent the worst effects of climate change. So this is a 1.5 degree climate change increase, which we've talked about before, ensuring that we keep the temperatures below that level. And as you can see, and that's looking at science and using best available science available at the current time. You can see that as there's a clear link to carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases within the atmosphere, and temperature rises and falls over the years. So reducing carbon emissions, reducing temperatures will get us there. So it's about ensuring our targets we play our part in order to deliver that. So that's science-based targets. So a lot of explanation around there, but hopefully this now gives you a bit of context. So by 2038, we aim to achieve net zero. So that's reducing all of our carbon emissions by at least 90% across all of our scopes. So that's everything that we have direct and indirect control over, and looking at all of those emissions, not just carbon emissions, but also things like methane produced from waste production, and ensuring it's in line with the best science and the best requirements. So hopefully it's a bit clearer for you now, and you'll be able to sort of understand the context. So what are our targets? 2030. So we say we're going to be net zero by 2038. Now in 2038, I turn 60, and I'm thinking that's a hell of a long way away, because I feel about 25. So putting long-term targets can mean I think, well, put it out there, it's going to be someone else's problem. Let's not worry about it. So part of signing up to Science-Based Target Initiatives is that we have to set near-term targets, and these need to be really focused and driven. So by 2030, which is coming around pretty quickly, actually, we've set ourselves these near-term targets, and that is to reduce our Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 90%. So have a real focus on what we have most responsibility for, and reducing those. And then looking at also having a real squeeze on our Scope 3 emissions, and getting those down to at least 42%. It's going to be a big challenge. So that's focus for 2030. And then, as I say, by 2038 is essentially when we're looking to get net zero. But post 2030, that final 8 years is going to be a lot harder, because we're going to deal with the easier stuff within these first few years. So we have near-term targets, 2030, and then 2038 is when we're looking to reach net zero. So where are our emissions? Talked about scope 1 and 2 emissions. Well, essentially, for us as an organisation, our direct emissions make up scope 1 and 2 make up about 5% of our overall carbon footprint. So 95% is in that scope 3. And as we look in a bit more detail around what that looks like, this is the footprint that we carried out for financial year end 2021. And this has really helped to identify where those hotspots are. So yes, we need to deal with our scope 1 and 2 emissions because we've got direct control over those. But when we look at our scope 3, we know that that's our field teams with all the fuel that they use, and we know that it's about the materials and services that we buy in, and all that embodied carbon that goes into making the concrete, the cement, and the timber products as well that we use. And then the fourth one on there is about the waste generated. That's a big chunk of what we do. We do produce our waste, green waste, when it decomposes, gives off methane. So we need to make sure we manage that effectively, so we're not releasing that methane unnecessarily into the atmosphere. And then the final one on there is capital goods that we're focusing on. Not a huge amount that we can do with that. That's all around the sort of the assets that we own, the Teslas, etc. And we're going to continue to buy those. So it's always going to be a bit of a challenge, but it's recognising that that's in our focus area. So we know what our footprint is. So what are we doing about it? So what we have is we've set up a number of task groups who are now going away and developing how we're going to reduce our emissions. So we've got 5 groups, and then we've also got the operational functions. So you can see who's looking after and leading on each of those groups. So for our scope 1 and 2 emissions, the focus there is to move over to 100% electric fleet and hand tools, and then moving as much as we can to non-fossil fuel for the larger bits of plant, non-fossil fueled machinery by 2030. So there's a timeline which we're working on. We're working on that. Field teams that Mark Jenner's looking at is about how can we sign our field teams up to provide us with data and to look at their carbon emissions and provide us with the information that we need, and to help them to commit through contract to make the switch to electric tools and equipment and vehicles. Products and services, again, looking at how we can what are the best products out there, what different low carbon options could we use, how can we work with our customers to start using some of these products, how can we get the information that we need out of our suppliers, and it's all ensuring that we try and use our group suppliers as much as we can so we can get the right information through. Similar thing with waste is trying to get consistent approach to waste, and then ensuring that we move as much away from landfilling and energy recovery, and focusing more on how do we reduce the waste and how do we reuse it in the first instance, which will really drive our emissions down. Chris Howard's then working on the enablers, but primarily because this is by enablers we're talking primarily around all the systems, IT systems that we need to have in place to help measure all of the carbon emissions that we've got throughout the business, and then look at how we can reduce them. As a big, and again, as part of the enablers, it's about education of our people and our supply chain and our field teams, as well as creating all those other bits of infrastructure that we need to help deliver the rest of the roadmap. And then finally, the piece that we're looking at is then how do we then drive that into the operational businesses? So the operational businesses will be looking at putting their own carbon plans together and helping and ensuring that we're all on the same page and fitting in with what's happening at a central level. So this is essentially going to involve everyone in order to help us to reach our 2030 targets and then going on to be net zero by 2038. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a summary of what we're doing. I've not gone into masses amount of detail around all the individual things that we're doing, but we will start to see some of the specific areas that we're working on. But just, I mean, again, if you want to have a think and put in the chat, what things do you think that you could do in your work life and within your personal life to help reduce emissions? Because everything we do, reduce the amount of energy that we use and reducing the amount of carbon emissions that we use is going to play into reducing our net zero requirements, reducing our carbon emissions, I mean. So yeah, if you want to just pop into chat again, apologies, I can't see it, but I don't know, Mark, if there's anything coming through on what people think they can do.
Yeah, a couple of people were talking about using public transport, using the train,
yeah,
to get to and from the office and from, well, anywhere really. Is there any other comments for the chat?
Yeah, looking at how we travel, I mean, both personally and for work is key, and it's always expensive to travel, no matter what method you use. So if we reduce our travel, we're always going to have cash in our pocket, which is good. So yeah, we considering actually, do you need to travel in the first place, and then taking a more if you do, then looking at more efficient options. I can see the chat here. Holiday in the UK, not abroad. Yeah, absolutely, that's the key one. Or not going on too many foreign holidays. So long as you walk there. Yes, Brian. Yeah, you can walk on a holiday. Yes, swap diesel for EVs. Absolutely. Obviously, we're doing that within the business, and we've got things like Octopus set up to help our staff do that outside of the workplace as well, which is really good. I mean, that's a great one for just in scheduled visits between sites, so doing less miles. Yeah, think about the way you're travelling. So you're not travelling up and down the country. What can you do in order to maximise your time when you're travelling around? Because we do inevitably have to travel for our business, but how can we make that more effective? Cycling more and then eat less meat. Yeah, absolutely. Hannah, that's a good one. I'm going to come on to that one just as a finish. There's a little bit of a quiz at the end. Lots of good stuff going on there. I mean, just as a kind of highlight, these are things to think about, really. So what energy and fuel are you using? Are you on a green energy tariff? What kind of vehicles have you got? What fuel are you burning there? Thinking about how green is your supply chain. So we all have different levels of interaction with the supply chain and with our customers. So are we asking our customers and our suppliers around, have you thought about a low carbon alternative? Do they offer a low carbon alternative? And again, we've talked about reducing waste. That's again another quick and easy one, and has good savings. So yeah, have a think. I think, is there a low carbon option? Is there switching things off is a simple one. Turning your electricity down, your heating down. It's starting to get warmer now. Hopefully most of us have got our heating off. So yeah, lots of different ways, and everything that you do plays its part in reducing our carbon emissions as a business, as an individual, and as a global society as a whole. Okay, got a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to do a very quick quiz for you and see if I can keep an eye on the chat on my phone as we go. So high or low, we all know play your cards, right? And this links into what Hannah was saying about eat less meat, meatless Mondays. Excellent. Don't have to go veggie or vegan, but just knowing how much carbon associated with different proteins can just make you think a little bit more. So chicken has per portion roughly about 1.5 kilograms of associated carbon emissions. Do you think that eggs have a higher or lower amount of associated carbon? What are people saying? We're getting some lower, yeah. Oh, some lower, mainly low. Justin keeping on the face. Looks like most people are saying lower, looking at the chats. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, quite a lot lower actually, which is good. So if we go from eggs to fish. And fish is higher or lower than eggs? It's got highers coming through. Some lowers. Yeah, so yeah, higher. Okay, brilliant. Yes, it is. Yeah, still lower than chicken, but higher than eggs. Tofu. You think that's higher or lower? Some lowers coming through. A lot higher, lots of lowers. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, it's lower. It is lower. Not so as eggs, interestingly, but it's still very low alternative. Okay, pork compared to tofu, higher or lower? Just in your comment, Brian. Tasteless. Yeah, I have to say, I can't do tofu. Pork, yes, absolutely. You're saying higher. I think that's quite an easy one. Yes, it is higher. Almost twice the amount than chicken. Lamb, higher or lower than pork? Higher. Lower. Interesting. Oh, quite a lot of lows on this one. Okay, looks like saying lower. It's actually a lot higher. And the thing to think about is where we have a lot of New Zealand pork in this country. So a lot of it gets flown a long way, which is why it's so high. What are pulses? Higher or lower? Lower. Okay, lower than lamb. Yeah, I think it's quite an easy one. Yeah, they're actually the lowest on there. So really good source of protein and a really good low carbon footprint. And then finally, what about beef? What do we think about beef? Everyone's gone for higher. Yeah, everyone's gone for higher. Yeah, massive difference. So 10.5. So it's the biggest by far. So talking about sort of, say not promoting everyone going vegan, veggie, if that's what we want to do, then that's fine. But just sort of thinking about, well, actually, how much of these really high, the lamb, the beef, the meats am I having? And perhaps if I have a bit more chicken, or a bit more fish, or the occasional, or the more veggie meals, then actually you can reduce your carbon footprint quite significantly. So just small changes and making yourself aware of these kind of things can really help. So I'm conscious we're 1 minute over. So just there's some useful links and information there. Also, Supply Chain Sustainability School has loads of great stuff on there. A couple of key courses, e-learning courses, which are really, really good. If you want to go away and find out a bit more about carbon and reducing and offsets and net zero, there's some great stuff on GC Learning. And next week we've got Chris Bawtry coming along to talk about nature recovery. So conscious I'm over, but I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants any questions. I'll just stop sharing so I can see if there is anyone still there. There we go. Brilliant. Yes, you are still there. Excellent. Yeah. So any questions or comments that anyone's got? Well, it's all to do with the Brian asked about why are eggs lower. It's all, you don't have to grow the chicken So once you start off with an egg, and then you have to put all the input into growing and feeding the chicken, whilst you've only just got the egg, if that makes sense. Don't ask me too many technical questions about how carbon emissions of food. It's not my hot point. Will we be kept up to date with how targets are doing? Yeah, absolutely. So we was a massive amount of work going on at the moment to calculate our next carbon footprint, which Olivia's busily working away. So just as a prompt, if anyone has received any emails from Liv saying, please provide me with information, you'll know who you are. If we can get that information ASAP, we can get that information back out to you. And we're forever refining and improving our data collection on that. So yes, we will. And we're aligning it to the financial reporting. So we'll be looking at giving a formal report on how we're doing against the targets and our reduction in about October time. And I think we're scheduling it to do on one of these lunch and learns. I might be, maybe not, but I can't. Yeah, it certainly will be coming out to you. Okay. All right, but there's no other questions. Thank you very much for your time. We'll make the slides and everything available to you, and do give us a shout if you want any more info.
Thanks, Sophie. That was great.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.